now the Clippers, who they 7 games they did it. They were down 2-0. Kawhi would not just let them lose. They all played really well, but against the Mavs. But Vish, who is the X factor for this Clippers team?
So, I mean, outside, like, obviously, Kawhi Leonard, I think everybody knows it's the playoffs. You're probably going to get a very efficient 38-5 from Kawhi Leonard. It's just what you get every year in the playoffs the last 5 years. So I think we know. And, like, I guess you could say Paul George if he plays like Paul George, but I feel like that's kind of like an easy answer, too, because I think Paul George played actually really well throughout the Mavericks series. Even when his shot wasn't falling, he kept going inside, getting himself to the free throw line. He played well as a point guard, too, when they had him distribute. You could say Rondo. You could say Marcus Morris, who finally shot the ball well yesterday. But I'm going to actually go with the guy who they inserted in the starting lineup after Game 3 as their X factor, and that's a former Piston. I was very upset when the Pistons gave this guy the money they gave him, but I've come around to like him, and that's Reggie Jackson. And the reason I'm going to go with Reggie Jackson is, first off, I think he's the one guy on this roster that can truly score one-on-one. So when Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, throw him the basketball with 8 seconds left in the shot clock, I think he can create a good shot because he's got a really good handle and he's athletic enough to do so. So I think that's one reason. And then the second reason is that I think he's the one other on this roster. If there's a game that Paul George and Kawhi Leonard don't play great, I mean, he played really well in this entire series. He averaged 15 a game, and he hit a lot of big shots even today. He's a guy that's capable of getting 35 in a playoff game and winning you that basketball game. Just look back. The game that always stands out to me with Reggie Jackson, the game I think that got him paid by the Pistons. If you remember when 2014, when the Thunder beat the Grizzlies, they beat them in OT. I think it was a very pivotal game in that series. I want to say it was Game 3 or Game 4 they beat them, or it might have been Game 5. It was a 7-game series, and Kevin Durant shot 5 for 21 in that game. Russell Westbrook shot 6 for 24, and they won that game in OT because they got 32 points from Reggie Jackson. And so, I mean, obviously it's a different Reggie Jackson, but just watching the way he's played, just knowing what his actual abilities are and all of that, I think he's the Clippers X factor because Reggie Jackson is capable of averaging the 15 a game he averaged in this series for the rest of the playoffs. And if he does so, the Clippers are going to be really tough to beat.
I like that one. Actually, I think that's a great selection. And one of the reasons is, Pat Bev played a lot in the beginning, but he got phased out of the lineup. And you know why? Because Reggie Jackson was just nailing threes. Like, I think it was Game 6. He had probably like 5 threes, and they were just like, it was pure. Like, it was nothing but net, like it was a perfect shot. And that's kind of what they need from him because they obviously have a bunch of really good 3-point shooters. Kawhi can do it in the playoffs for whatever reason. Paul George, Marcus Morris sometimes decides he wants to make threes and other times he doesn't. Nicholas Batum, for whatever reason, he can shoot threes incredibly well, but they need that one other guy who can shoot threes consistently to where, like if Kawhi drives or Paul George drives and they get collapsed, they can swing it around 2 to 3 times and then still have someone who's going to be able to make an open three. And that's where I think like Reggie Jackson kind of steps in and he's like, all right, I can make threes at a pretty high rate if you give me even not a lot of space. Like there was a lot of times he was taking contested threes and he was still just hitting them. And I don't know how many of the other Clippers can do that. Certainly, I don't think Rondo can. Now, Rondo can make some open ones, definitely. But Pat Bev would certainly not be doing that. I don't think Terrence Mann would be able to do that, although he's been playing really well this series. So I think Reggie Jackson's kind of that 5th guy who, you feel confident in him shooting threes. And he didn't do completely terrible against Doncic, like he was in his face, but he was, Luka was putting buckets on everyone's head. So at least he was, kind of close. He wasn't Zubac. He wasn't getting just splashed on left, right, and center. But I think Reggie Jackson honestly had one of the better series out of all the players on the Clippers, just game in and game out, consistently playing well.
Yeah, I also love the pick, and I think you nailed it on the head, Blake, with the 3 ball from Reggie Jackson, because I think I always knew him as a flashy kind of guard who can get in the hole very well, drive, and he had like a pretty good mid range. But if he's hitting threes at the level that he has been, it I think opens up exactly what Vish has been saying, where if he gets the ball with 7-8 seconds left, the guy's pressed up enough on him because he's shooting the three ball well that he can get to the hole and be a 3-level scorer. He can basically go wherever. And I think his play has definitely stood out to me. And I think when you look at, because Pat Bev's not really in the lineup anymore, and when you look at like him compared to a Rondo, yeah, maybe Rondo's a better passer. But Rondo, if he gets the ball with 7 seconds left, they're just trying to get him to shoot a jump shot. And most likely he's not going to make it. Whereas when Reggie Jackson has been getting the ball in those situations, he can hit the three, so he could really get it with like maybe 3 seconds left and still kind of get a shot up there. And because he's been doing that so well, he can also get to the hole well, which I think he is pretty similar on Rondo's level in terms of driving. So I think it was a great pick by Vish. And I think Reggie Jackson has been playing elite. And I'm very interested to see how he fares against the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, and there's one more angle to this that stood out to me about Reggie Jackson in these playoffs, and that's the maturity that Reggie Jackson has played with. If you look at Reggie Jackson's career, especially with the Thunder, and I know this was one of the things that really bothered me when he was on the Pistons. He played with tunnel vision. He took a lot of bad shots. Reggie Jackson in this series, I don't think there was one shot that he took that I said, "Oh my God, why'd you take that shot?" If he took a three that was contested, it was because it was late in the shot clock. He had to put it up. He played under control. He didn't try to do anything extra. He was making sure he was making the right passes. He competed on defense. I thought Reggie Jackson played phenomenal basketball. It was probably the most mature basketball I've ever seen him play. Noel talked about it, right? He was a very flashy guard, especially in his younger days with the Pistons and Thunder that went straight into the hole. A lot of the times he would go into the hole and there would be 2 or 3 bodies around him and he would just put up a wild shot. Now you see him, if he gets into the lane, there's nobody there. He pulls out, he resets. I thought the Clippers in general, the last 5 games of the series, their shot selection was phenomenal, every single one of them. And I thought Reggie Jackson epitomized that. And if he's playing mature basketball, especially when you look at his talent, because he's more talented than a guy, that you signed for the veteran minimum. Like, he's more talented definitely than Patrick Beverley. He's more talented definitely than Rajon Rondo, especially at this point, given Rondo's age. So if he's playing like this with his handle, shooting the 3 ball like this, and if he's doing this consistently, because that's always been the question with Reggie Jackson, can he be consistent? Because there's times he can play like a top 10, top 11 point guard in the NBA. So we'll see. But I think if he can play like that, then the Clippers will be really tough to beat. And I think they have a way better shot against the Jazz if Reggie Jackson's playing like this.
Mm-hmm. I thought the maturity part was kind of a underrated thing. Like last year, every time he touched the ball and I was watching the Clippers and rooting for them, I'd be like, oh no, Reggie Jackson has the ball. Like, is he going to turn it over? Is he going to make a bad pass? Is he just going to toss up a brick? And more times than not, I felt like he made the wrong play, at least last year. I'm just basing it from like last year's Clippers to this year. But now he's like, you trust, like when he has the ball in his hands, you are like not that worried, something bad's going to happen. And I think that's a huge improvement in maturity. And, maybe it's the team is a lot more gelled than last year and, they trust each other more to make the right play. And I don't know what it is, but like over the course of the season, like last year, it was just concerning because every time he had it, he was very much so a wild card and just no clue what the possession was going to look like once he got the ball in his hands. Could either be really great or could be a disaster. But now it seems he's kind of honed in on those mistakes and, takes care of the ball a lot better.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say, too, when looking at Reggie Jackson this next series, one matchup comparison that I think could be a telltale sign of how the game goes is I would say if Reggie Jackson plays or outperforms Mike Conley, the Jazz point guard, I don't see the Clippers losing those type of games. I think if he can, and I'm not saying he's like expected to do that, but like that's just a matchup you can see because they're both the point guards of each team. And if he does that, I think it would just give the Clippers an edge, and it would really like be a point to prove how he could be an X factor.
I think he's capable of doing that too. Like, he's really talented. He's a bigger guard that has a really good handle, that has a really good first step, that's shooting the ball pure. Like, he's like Luka Doncic right now, where when he rises up, that thing is nothing but net, pure, splash, wet. And so, like, I mean, with Reggie Jackson, it's always a question mark whether he can do it. But he's capable, definitely, of doing that.
Him against Clarkson will be interesting too, because Clarkson this year's been really good. But I mean, if you guys remember his Lakers days, he was also just very much so a wild card. So that'll be interesting because, I don't know how much Reggie Jackson will play, maybe over 30 minutes, maybe not. Just kind of depends on the matchup and what Ty Lue wants to do. But those two going at it will be interesting to watch. Jackson versus Mike Conley will be interesting. Hopefully Donovan Mitchell doesn't get on him because that, I don't know. Reggie Jackson might be some barbecue chicken if that happens, but we'll see. But overall, I guess bottom line here is Reggie Jackson can be the Clippers' X factor against the Jazz, and if they advance later into the playoffs, we'll see. But his shooting and maturity are kind of the main reasons, and he's been shooting the lights out of the ball for whatever reason. Not too sure on that. It's a new Reggie Jackson, let's put it that way. But thank you guys. Go on.
Oh, my bad. Well, I was gonna say he had a pretty strong regular season, but I'm actually shocked that Reggie Jackson's been continuing this in the playoffs because
Well, yeah, and then I'll just jump in real quick and say one other causation. I don't know how logical it is, but a lot of times people relate Reggie Jackson to looking like Bobby Shmurda. Bobby Shmurda was released from jail this year. Reggie Jackson's going off this year in the playoffs. I'm not saying it's an exact causation, but I'm saying it deserves to be mentioned, is all I'm going to say.
It might not be a coincidence, I guess, is the bottom line here. Like, there might be some relation. And, Reggie Jackson had high hopes, but he's playing some of the best ball of his life right now. Even better than when he was on the Pistons, and that they had some powerhouse teams back then. But this is
we did have powerhouse teams.
Yeah, this is a different Reggie Jackson. This isn't the Reggie Jackson Drummond duo. This is Reggie Jackson and Kawhi.